I wanted to take a bit of time today to go into what I noticed to be the most prominent differences for an INFP in their teenage years versus in their 20s. So this will be going into what I notice in other people and also just what I've experienced myself. I think as INFPs in our teenage years, we really are very much living inside our own bubble. And our bubble is sort of like, I imagine it as this sort of small diameter space around us. And because this bubble is quite small, it's very condensed. And our inner world and the things that we're interested in, it's very rich to us. We're very deeply engaged with what we care about. And that could be all manner of things, right? It could be reading fantasy books or playing fantasy video games. It could even actually be sports. In some people's cases, it could be maybe that you just love social dynamics. It could be that you love horse riding, right? Whatever it is, that sort of inner world and those personal interests are very rich, and it almost feels like it just saturates the whole field of your vision. And I think that unless, for example, we might have been forced into a role that's inappropriate for us, or we're like being pressured to basically be something that we're not, a lot of the time, unless that's happening, I think if an INFP as a teenager is left to their own devices, the way we tend to be is we tend to just want to pursue our interests very wholeheartedly. I don't think, generally speaking, we care as much about what's going on and what's expected of us all the time. Like, we tend to be more occupied in what interests us. And I think this can often be interpreted as temperamentally disagreeable or impolite, if we're looking at temperament theory. But oftentimes I think this is just that there's so much interest and so much color in those things that we're into that we don't even necessarily think about broadening out into those other things. So I think for a lot of us as INFPs, we're just so much in that condensed space. Where I think one of the major differences going into our 20s is that bubble, it no longer has that really rich, condensed space around us, and it starts to have to expand to accommodate for a lot of the things that we're needing to now become responsible for as an adult in the world. It has to start to expand to understand how other people operate more, right? And often we're very good at this. Like when we actually take in data from someone else's experience or what someone else is feeling, we can often read them very well. But it can still be sometimes difficult just to expand out to understand how many differences and variations there are in people's psychology anyway. That bubble has to expand out to include our responsibilities as a citizen, right? The kind of things that we need to do to pay rent if we're moving outside of our parents' house, or if we've gone to university. It's kind of like having to figure out how to be consistent in those areas and how to make sure you show up and how to do this thing and that thing. Or if you're dating someone, like what it means to be involved in the dating marketplace, your friendships. It's like that bubble starts expanding out. And it's a beautiful thing in a way, because we start to get more in touch with all these different aspects and features of life and reality. And some of them are just incredible. But as that bubble starts to expand out, what I often found is that it's challenging, because as it's expanding out, like I said before, it was very rich and condensed, and now it's expanding out, so it's losing sometimes some of that vividness because it's needing to accommodate for and wrap itself around more things, and you're taking in more data. And it's different from when you're younger and you just have that really rich series of personal interests. It almost feels like sometimes I think for me there can be a sense of like nostalgia for my teenage years. Not necessarily because anything that amazing was happening. Actually, my teenage years were really rough in a lot of ways, especially in my home life. But I miss how I could engage with certain things. I miss what it felt like to walk to the beach at midnight with my best friend in Western Australia. And it wasn't necessarily about the conversation. It wasn't necessarily about the beach. It was just the state that I could get into when it felt like nothing else mattered, because there was just that richness of my own condensed world. But then as I've got older, it's expanded out, and I wouldn't trade it. Some of the experiences that I have now and the level of understanding that I have of myself and situations now, I wouldn't trade that for the world. But it's different from when you're younger, I think, because that really rich, vivid space has to accommodate for more. And when you have to accommodate for more, that comes with great reward, but it also comes with great sacrifice. And assimilating to the world, which, by the way, in temperament theory is often referred to as the politeness trait. Your ability to assimilate to institutions, whether that's a social institution, an academic institution, whatever it is, that can often be really difficult for us, not because we're just disagreeable iconoclasts, like we're often perceived as, to be honest, but actually because it can be painful to sacrifice what is most vivid, rich, and alive in us in order to accommodate for this system. And it doesn't mean that we won't do it, or that we're saying that we can't. It just means that it often takes us time to wrap our minds around and to really start to assimilate to those systems, because we have to give up the thing oftentimes that we're most directly interested in. And it's not helpful when people on the outside are like, look, I know you like this, but you have to do it, so just get over it. Because that, I think, also tends to make us want to rebel. And sometimes I think we end up in a state of arrested development when we don't want to get involved in the world. And that's definitely been the case for me. I'm 26 now. And only really in the last couple of years have I really started to think more about actually assimilating to the world and taking more responsibility for myself. For a long time, I just kind of bummed around doing whatever I want and living off of the generosity of people. And I do still to some degree. Like even right now, I'm living with a friend because I had a serious living situation problem recently. I have to find a new place. You know, so it's like if I had have been sorting out my life since I was 17 or 18, instead of going on like meditation retreats and traveling here and there and pursuing like these obscure interests that I had, maybe I wouldn't have that. But I wouldn't trade it because I did the thing that I felt like I needed to, and I followed my heart, and I wouldn't be who I am now if I didn't have it. So point being that bubble expands, and you have to start accommodating for more, and you have to start sometimes you have to sacrifice some of what feels most rich for you in the moment. That's not to say you can't integrate it in later. It's just to say that the expansion of that sometimes comes at a cost. So that's something I definitely notice for myself and other people as well. Another thing that I notice for us in our teens versus in our 20s is I think because we're so strong in that introverted feeling, it's our primary function, and it's our so-called like a fish in water function. We don't even notice it because it's so seamlessly integrated into how we operate, right? That cognitive function is essentially how we experience the world for the most part. And with introverted feeling, what I notice in people, what I've noticed in myself, is that when we're younger, we tend to just try on a lot of different identities, right? Like we'll watch Dazed and Confused by Richard Linklater, and it's like all of a sudden we're like being like, we're kind of mimicking or trying on that kind of identity as that person, or we're being kind of like a stonery person because we watched that movie. Or now we're maybe more like grungy and skateboarder, but then, you know, we hang out with someone and they're kind of cool and hip hop, and we like some specific aspect of their character that we can't quite define. So we start to kind of mimic and be that. And I think INFPs do this a lot because there's a core thing around the not just identity and building an identity like it's some peripheral entity. Like I think some people's identity, it's almost like this peripheral thing where they're like, yeah, that's just who I am. I know who I am and that's it. But for us, we tend to want to go about things in a way that's visceral, right? We really want to know who we are at a felt level. And that means that we have to try on a lot of different things. We have to be a lot of different kinds of people sometimes to come more closely in contact with who we are at a more authentic level. So when we're younger, we're in our teen years, we're trying on a lot of these identities. We're trying on a lot of our different perceptions about what it might mean to be this way. And we might be doing that in the more overt sense where we're just mimicking a certain kind of personality or character. Or we might be doing it in a subtler sense where we're just sort of noticing unconsciously that we're gravitating towards a certain crowd or group because it just makes sense to us, or it feels right, or there's something there that resonates with us at some level. Where I think what for me started to shift more as I got into my mid-20s was more like I still take interest in I still might have an interest in a certain group or area, and I might sort of go through a phase with something, But when I was younger, I didn't notice the principles in my life. I just noticed the content and not really the context. Where now I feel like the context or the principles, the things that I stand for and the things that I care about, my values, are more deeply rooted. They have more rhizome now. Where I think before I was so desperately trying to figure that out. And because of that, you're trying to find that in all these different forms a lot of the time, right? Where for me now, I know that pretty much whatever relationship that I enter into, whether it's a romantic, a platonic friendship, a workplace environment, the kind of jobs that I have, right? Working in mental health, working in counseling with people, everything that I do, I think my principal role is to work with understanding people at a very deep level, right? That's really what I offer. And yeah, sure, there are other aspects of my personality that I offer as well, but I think being able to meet someone at where they're at and understand their experience and what they're going through, and to be able to empathize with that at a very natural level, that's what comes organically for me. That's a principle to me. And I think no matter what I'm doing or no matter how I'm doing it, that's more of a principle, where when I was younger, I didn't know that, right? That would end up happening a lot of the time, but I didn't necessarily have the consciousness of it. It hadn't been integrated into the level of my ego. And that could be the same for you. For example, if you always were really interested in, let's say you were interested in very like James Dean iconoclastic figures when you were a teenager, and you kept noticing yourself try on this kind of identity. But as those series of traits and that character disposition deepens in you and it refines itself, what it starts to crystallize into is a more sort of fleshed out sense of who you really are. And it might not be that you need to be this like rebellious iconoclast, but maybe you're someone who actually notices certain flaws or difficulties in situations, and you don't want to involve yourself in bullshit. So you start to notice that you actually have more of an authenticity to you, and maybe you're actually a little bit disagreeable in a temperamental way. That becomes more like a principle of how you operate. And then the jobs you choose and the relationships you choose and the kind of interests you have can fit into that category more. Where before, when you were younger, it's more like just trying to get a sense of what anything feels like to begin with. There's a lot of scrapping for these different things, where over time I think our personality refines itself into a more principled set of things. And once we find those principles and those themes, I don't want to say we grasp onto them, because that sort of implies a kind of like a greed or an attachment to being a certain way. I don't mean it like that, but I think we hold that close to our heart once we've started to integrate and recognize those things. And for INFPs, we really appreciate when we find something that feels very deeply authentic to us, even though we know that there's the journey of authenticity and being one's true self is never ending. Having a really authentic relationship or connection to a principle or to a quality of some kind or to an aspect of self is really rewarding and enriching to us. And sometimes that's difficult to understand from at the outset, I think, because it's like, why do you care so much about this specific quality of experience? And it's like, how do I explain to you that how it lights me up inside, how it enriches me, how it sort of feels like it illuminates my whole mind, and my place in the world feels secure once I have that access to that quality. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't have an affinity for that kind of experience? So that's something else I definitely notice for myself and other people as well. I think another thing is that differing from our younger years to going into our 20s, I think we start to have more of a sense of people's motives and reasonings, because we start to gain deeper access to our motives and reasonings, because we're very strong in our introverted feeling. The spectrum in which we can experience our emotion starts to become very refined, and there's a lot of shades and gradients to our emotional spectrum, to what we can feel and to what we can experience internally. And I think what starts to happen is, as we explore this emotional spectrum more, and this, I heard someone give a great definition of emotion yesterday, actually, and he said that An emotion is something between a narrative and a sensation. And I think that's a beautiful definition, because it's like the narrative is how we perceive the world and what we believe to be going on in the world and self. And then the sensation is sort of the visceral base through which we experience that, right? And the range that we have for that is so broad that as we start to explore and it starts to sort of spill out more into that space, our ability to then empathize with others expands as well. Like my ability to empathize with people now is much different, is much more in depth and fleshed out than my ability to have done so as a teenager would have been. You know, I always had a propensity for listening to people and trying to understand people, and that always interested me. Even in literature, I've always enjoyed subjective, character-oriented literature. But now I feel like my ability to understand character and the depth which I can take to that is far more integrated. It's very natural. It's almost like automatic. It doesn't feel like something I have to do. It just feels like something that is an extension of who I am or what I am most of the time. Where I think as a teenager, it was more of a sense of just trying to get what was going on within me. And because of that, I think actually I didn't know what other people were going through or experiencing a lot of the time, and other people's motives, other people's motives and what other people wanted out of a relationship or out of their life often just eluded me. I didn't get why they did it. And although I can still go through phases of that, I feel like now, because I understand more of myself, the mirroring and the empathy of that with other people has enriched a lot. So I feel like I have more space and understanding for different things that other people are going through. And I know that this last thing that I'm saying is not necessarily exclusive to INFPs. I think that's just learned empathy from life experience. But I think when you have a very strong access to a broad emotional spectrum in yourself, it does start to mirror out to other people. And that is often why I think we seek jobs in therapist roles or counselor roles or coaching roles or psychological roles where we're looking to understand people, or sociological roles where we're looking to understand groups, historical roles, academic roles. We're very much interested in not just what's going on mechanically through the psyche of a person, but we're interested in really knowing at a very heartfelt level, like, how does this really all work and fit together? And I think that's more of that extroverted intuition kicking in. It's that sense of like, how does this all weave together into this larger thing? How does that all click? And how does this process work piece by piece? So I can start to get a broader sense of what this experience of being alive is really like for me and other people, right? That's everything that I've got today. That's all just a few off the top of my head. I started writing this down and then I was just like, I don't think I need to. I think I can just free associate on this forever. I might make some more videos along this line soon with just more of the subjective, introverted INFP style to it. That's something I've been feeling called to. But like I said before, I've been in a really stressful situation very recently. So I'm sort of sorting my life out a little bit at this moment. Not that I've never not been doing that, but I'm doing that on overdrive right now. So I'd love to get back into more videos very soon though. And I'll start with that today. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing this to anyone you feel like would find it valuable. My email is down below for all coaching, counseling sort of stuff. Hope you're having a beautiful day, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.